Good morning. Happy Sabbath.
We're going to start the day with singing the B-I-B-L-E, 2 rounds.
The B-I-B-L-E, yes, that's the book for me. I stand alone on the Word of God, the B-I-B-L-E. The B-I-B-L-E, yes, that's the book for me. I stand alone on the Word of God, the B-I-B-L-E.
Our next song is going to be I'm in the Lord's Army.
I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly o'er the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir! I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir! I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir! I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly o'er the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir!
Hello everyone, I'm Evelyn. I'm going to be reading you a verse and singing you a song. Matthew 7, verse 12. In everything, therefore, treat people the same way you want them to treat you, for this is the law and the prophets. Now I'm going to sing you the song. Do to others what you would have them do to you. Do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. So in everything you do to others what you would have them do to you. Happy Sabbath.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Sabbath. I'm here with another story for you. The title of this one is Living in the Hospital, and it's about a young man named Thomas. This story takes place when Thomas is 5 years old. Are you ready? Let's read. Tom was very sick. He was 5 years old, and medical doctors couldn't understand why this little boy with blue eyes and black hair couldn't seem to recover. He coughed, suffered a fever, and complained of chest pains. He stayed in the hospital for a while, and when he felt better, he went home. But then the cough, the fever, and the chest pains, they always returned, and he would end up back in the hospital. He was hospitalized 15 times in 1 year. A doctor took x-rays and did blood tests to diagnose the illness, but nothing worked. Tom moved into the hospital when he was 6. He was way too sick to stay at home. Father and mother just prayed and prayed, and they slept in the boys' hospital room. Tom grew worse, and the doctors began to avoid his mother. He liked to share good news with the parents, but he didn't have any good news about Tom. Mother confronted him one day. "Why are you avoiding me all the time?" she asked. The doctor looked sad. "Because there isn't anything we can do," he said. "I'm very sorry, but you need to let your son go." Mother quietly went to Tom's bed. The boy sensed that something was different. Mother seemed to know something new, and he saw tears in her eyes. He looked out the window. It was winter, and children were joyfully racing their sleds down snowy hills. Smiling parents hugged their children. "Mommy," Tom said, "I think I'll never be healthy again. Is that true?" "Doctors have done everything they can," she said. "Only one doctor is left who can help. If you believe in him, he might heal you, but you need to ask." Tom understood that Mother was talking about Jesus. He and Mother knelt beside the hospital bed, and he prayed his first prayer in his whole life. The next day, Tom felt a little better. Day after day, he felt better, and in 6 days, the surprise doctor announced that he could go home because Tom was well. Several years later, Tom learned why he had been sick. His father had contracted a parasite during his visit to Australia, and the parasite had been passed to Tom. It had embedded itself into his lungs, and they'd never seen anything like that before in Poland. Tom has never been hospitalized again, but he goes to the hospital nearly every day. He is a lung doctor now, and he treats people who have lung problems like he used to have. When he studied to become a doctor, he saw how God saved his life, and he tested his own lungs and found no scars. And after such a lengthy illness, there should have been scars. Tom realized it was a miracle. He's finishing his residency and thinking about becoming a missionary doctor. He wants to help others, just like doctors and Jesus helped him. Maybe God has a mission for me to do, he says. I feel like I have received the great loan from God that I need to repay. One day I will know my mission. I thought this was such a great story, and it touched my heart because we do serve the greatest physician of all, the greatest healer, the greatest comforter. And I've had to cling to Jesus lately because just several weeks ago, my grandpa was diagnosed with cancer. And it was really hard to hear. And so my family is praying for a miracle, just like Tom. And we're hoping to receive one for him. And if not, we'll trust God's timing and we'll trust his will. So I hope that you guys always remember to cling to Jesus and his promises. Cry out to him in times of trouble and in times of when it's going good. And he will be there for you, just like he was there for Tom. And like I'm praying, he'll be there for my grandpa. Have a happy Sabbath, and we hope to see you soon.
Hi, and good morning, Cadillac Primary Sabbath School class. I'm here again to remind you that we made a commitment to sponsor Manor down in Guatemala. Remember to keep sending money to help support him, as well as praying for him. I even brought my laptop as a reminder that you can go online to AdventistGiving.org. Find where it says Cadillac SDA Church, and then look at the tithe envelope that's online. It will say Primary Sabbath School class, and you can give that way. Thank you. I hope you have a wonderful Sabbath.
I'm Ezra, and today our verse is Isaiah 41:13. For I, the Lord, your God, will hold your right hand, saying to you, fear not, I will help you. Bye.
Hi, good morning, Cadillac children, adults, and anyone else that might be watching us this morning.
Happy Sabbath, everyone!
We are so happy that you're here, and we're going to learn more stories about Daniel and his 3 friends. Now let's do just a little bit of a review. So who remembers last week where our story left off? Anyone remember? Alex?
About the statue?
Yes, right? King Nebuchadnezzar had his dream, and we learned about what the dream meant. Remember, he asked the most difficult thing ever. He asked for his wise men to not only tell him the meaning of the dream, but first they had to even know what the dream was. That was impossible. Impossible for everyone except who? Yes, impossible for everyone but God. And so Daniel and his friends prayed, and God gave Daniel not only had the dream, but the interpretation of it, and he was able to go to King Nebuchadnezzar. Right? We remember that God is fighting hard for the heart of Babylon and mighty King Nebuchadnezzar. So for a while, things went well. King Nebuchadnezzar saw how amazing the God of heaven was. But over time, King Nebuchadnezzar, the mightiest king, started to get proud. And he probably decided, I wonder if I can change the future. Have you ever thought about that? How about you, class? And how about you, kids? Have you ever thought about, I wonder if I can change something in the future by changing something now? Kind of fun to think about, isn't it? So King Nebuchadnezzar decided that he was going to be a powerful ruler, not just for a little while. Do you guys remember the dream? In the dream, Babylon was what part of the image?
The head of gold.
Babylon was the head of gold. But Nebuchadnezzar decided he didn't want any other kingdoms to come. Remember, we learned that after Babylon would come which kingdom? Let's do a little review. Who remembers after Babylon the kingdom?
Medo-Persia.
Medo-Persia, and then after Medo-Persia?
Greece.
Greece, and then after Greece?
Rome.
Rome, and then after Rome?
Whole bunch of little countries.
Whole bunch of little countries, right? The iron and the clay. And then what would come at the very end? Down at the tippy toes, what was going to come?
The rock.
The rock, and it would smash the statue or smash the image. And who was that rock representing?
Jesus.
Yes, Jesus, and his kingdom would be
Standing forever.
standing forever. Good job. Yes, but King Nebuchadnezzar didn't quite like it anymore. At first he accepted that vision and that it was true, but then he decided, I don't just want to be the head of gold. I want everything to be gold. I want everything to be Babylon. And he decided he was going to do that by making a huge statue of pure gold. Not only would the head be gold, but the chest and the arms would be gold. The stomach would be gold, the thighs, the legs, the feet, everything would be gold. And he must have taken quite a while and hired probably some of the best men in his kingdom to make that. And we're told that it was super high, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. Now those are measurements that we don't use anymore in our language, but they were measurements that they used back a long time ago.
How big would it be?
And this was a huge statue. Andreas, you asked a super good question. What was it?
How big is a cubit?
Good. So cubit, I had no idea how big it was, but on researching it, a cubit is a length of measurement, right? Have you guys all seen like your mom or dad take out a measuring tape or probably a ruler at school and you measure? So cubit was supposed to be as big as an average man, his forearm. So from his elbow to the tip of his middle finger. Now, obviously, if you were a kid or someone smaller measuring, your cubit would be shorter, right? So a cubit was anywhere between 18 inches and 21 inches. So we're going to say 20 inches, so almost 2 feet in a cubit. And this image, this big gold image that was to represent Babylon and King Nebuchadnezzar was about 10 feet wide. So it was 6 cubits wide and it was 60 cubits tall, so about 100 feet tall. So it was a pretty big image, right? And I don't know, maybe they put it up on a hill somewhere, maybe on a platform somewhere. And King Nebuchadnezzar called together in his kingdom all the important people. So he said, all the people that work for me, that have government jobs, that help run my kingdom, the princes, all the important people gather here from all over the countries and the provinces that I rule over. That's what King Nebuchadnezzar said. And once they were all gathered together, what were the people asked to do? Melania is actually going to read it nice and loud for me out of the Bible. Melania, please. Daniel 3, 4, and 5. And then keep your spot.
Daniel 3.
Because we're going to read something in a minute after that.
Okay. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up."
So Daniel and his 3 friends had a decision to make. Now in this story, Daniel's not included in this chapter. So although we're in the book of Daniel, there's no mention of Daniel in this chapter. So I don't know where Daniel was. Maybe he was off way far away doing some work for the king, but for whatever reason, Daniel sounds like he wasn't able to be there, but his 3 friends were there and they have a big decision. Let's do a little review. Who can remember the names of Daniel's 3 friends? Yes.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Awesome, way to go. Now, those were their Babylonian names. So here's a good trivia question. Who remembers their Hebrew names for those three friends? Who remembers?
Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah.
Way to go. Good job. And who remembers Daniel's Babylonian name, even though he's not in this story this week?
Belshazzar.
Belteshazzar. Yes, you were so close. Just a T in there, right? Belteshazzar. Good job. So lots of names going around, but they're all the same people that we're studying about in our lesson. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they hear what the king has said, and they have a choice to make. Now, we've been studying about Daniel and his three friends, and we've already learned something really, really important. Now, this is super important for especially all the kids listening, because you have a chance to really get this right. You have a chance to build on this while you're still young, and I'm going to tell you a secret. Good habits are easier when you're young than when you're older. It's truly the truth. I promise you, as an adult, children, you have to listen to me. If you can learn good habits when you're a kid, it will make your life so much easier than if you have to try really hard to learn them when you're an adult. Have you ever heard the expression, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks? Right? When you're older, sometimes it's hard to learn new things. You can, because God is still powerful. He can even take adults and help us learn good, healthy habits. But if you can learn them as a kid, that's the best way. And we have already learned several times where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have made really good choices. What's the first really good choice that we learned? Do you remember the first story?
Eating good healthy food.
Yes, right? Eating good, healthy food and drinking healthy water. We talked about it might have sounded like a small thing, but when you take a step down the wrong path, you end up taking often more and more steps down that wrong path, and before you know it, you're going way off in a bad direction. So by doing what looked like a small thing, they were building character on how to trust God. What's another thing? This one might not be quite as obvious. What's another place in the story that we learned last week that show that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego with their friend Daniel were learning good, wise decisions and building character where their hearts were always directed towards God? Do you remember? There was a decree from the Babylonian king saying all my wise men will die, right? If they can't tell me my vision. And what did Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel, Belteshazzar, do?
They prayed.
They prayed. So we have learned what about these young men? They have learned to pray and trust God even when the situation is hard. And they've learned, even in small ways, to make good choices and honor God. Isn't that wonderful? And that's what we need to learn. And I hope that's what all of you are learning, adults and especially children. So now they're here and they hear the announcement. Everyone has to bow and worship this image made of gold. They have to make a decision who they're going to trust and what they're going to do. Now, I don't think they had a lot of time to make that decision. Is that why sometimes it's good to practice doing it in small things? Because sometimes you might have a big decision and you have to make a decision quickly. They didn't have time to really think about it for a long time, get together and say, what are we going to do? I think this all happened very quickly. Melania, could you read Daniel 3:6, nice and loud?
And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace.
So does that sound like fun? No. Sounds actually really scary, doesn't it? I brought a picture of a fire. Now, this is not a fiery furnace. This is just a fire in your fireplace. But could that really hurt and burn if you accidentally got into the fireplace? And this was a much bigger fiery furnace that they would be thrown into if they did not listen to the king. So again, they had a big decision. And we had just read prior in Daniel 3, 4, and 5. Melania, can you read one more time about the musical instruments? Can you find the place where it mentions musical instruments in Daniel 3, 4, or 5?
Yes.
What's it say?
Daniel 3, verse 5. That at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery and symphony, with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar set up.
So they were going to play lots of musical instruments. Now, when you think of music, is music a good thing or a bad thing?
Good thing.
It can be a wonderful thing, right? I think that music can be such a blessing. But is there times, class, that music is not always a good thing? Can you think of times or kinds of music that maybe aren't so good? So isn't it interesting that they were going to make this decree that when you hear the music, you have to bow and worship? Do you think it was the kind of music that would help them think clearly and make good choices? Did you know there's music in this world, and we still have music like this, and I'm sure they did back then, that just creates chaos in your brain? It may have a lot of clanging noise, or it might have a rhythm in it that just kind of messes with your ability to always think clearly and make good decisions. Music can do that, right? It can actually kind of push you to make a decision you might not normally make. And I'm sure if King Nebuchadnezzar was having them play music, it probably wasn't a very good kind of music, right? So they have a decision to make, right? We all have decisions to make. Maybe not like Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, but we all have important decisions to make in our life. And we're going to have to learn what decision they are going to make. But first, can I have your Bible? I'll put it right here for you. Let me ask you an important question. So King Nebuchadnezzar was demanding worship. So here's my question for you. Let's think really hard about God, what we already know about God, who we know God is. We've already learned some really important things about God, haven't we? We've learned that God is always about what?
Love.
God is always about love. God does not want obedience because we're fearful of him or scared of him. He wants us to obey him because we love him, right? Because in our hearts, we know God. We know that he's very good, very just, very merciful. And we know that God created us. He created the universe. He created our world. And we know that God's ways are the best ways. They're the ways that bring happiness in life. That's what God wants. But here's a king who is doing something very different than God. He is demanding that people worship his way or he will kill them, right? So it's really important to remember this story. We see a way that a person likes to require worship, and we see how God does worship. Now, Nebuchadnezzar's way is really Satan's way, isn't it? Satan likes to get his way no matter how. Satan's willing to force. Satan's willing to kill. Satan is willing to do anything to get his way. How about in our world? Does that ever happen in our world, even today? Mm-hmm. Did you know that even in our world, there are some people that look like very good people? They might go to church every week. They may pray. But if you don't do things their way, they start to get threatening. They say, you do it our way, or you might lose your job. Or you do it our way, or you may not be able to go and buy things at the store anymore. Or if you don't do it our way, you might get locked up in jail. It's really sad, isn't it? So even if they have the Bible and they say, oh, we love God, you need to look at what is their way. Is their way based on love, or is their way based on force? So another thing that's important that we've talked about Sabbath school class, and it's important to remember, is God's way always is based on love and freedom. Isn't God wonderful that he gives us freedom to make decisions? So I have a quick question for you. What about if you don't do it God's way? And God says, you can choose to love me or not, but if you don't choose to love me, someday I'm going to burn you in hell. Does that sound very loving? Do you think that's what the Bible really teaches? That either you do it God's way or he's going to burn you? I hope not, right? When I read the Bible, that's not what I learn or I see. I see God as loving and giving us freedom to make a decision. He even gives freedom not to love him and not to want to be with him. Isn't God amazing? I just love a God like that, don't you? So here we are. We're on the plains of Dura. There is the big golden image in front of us. The music is going to start playing. The announcement's been made. When you hear the music, you bow and worship or you go in the fiery furnace. What are you going to do? You have to make a decision. Make it quick. Who are you going to follow? Are you going to follow King Nebuchadnezzar or God in heaven? The music played. We look all over. Everyone's bowing down. Everyone's kneeling in worship, or at least they're pretending to. But wait, if you look at the picture, if you look way out in the crowd, there are 3 young men who are standing up. Don't you wonder if they were tempted to kneel? Don't you wonder if they thought, oh, we'll just kneel, but we really won't pray or worship the idol. We'll just kneel and pray to God in heaven? I don't know. When I get to heaven, I'm going to ask them if they were tempted. But what I know for truth is they didn't kneel or worship the image. Now, could God have forgiven them, do you think? If they had kneeled and then afterward felt bad and thought, oh, I just was so weak and I messed up, who thinks God could forgive them? God has forgiven much worse things in the Bible, hasn't he? But what a chance to witness, right? They would have missed a huge witnessing opportunity. Remember, these Hebrews were missionaries in Babylon. And we are going to learn what happens to them, because this is one of the best amazing stories in the whole Bible, I believe. In fact, if you said, quick, tell me your favorite story in the whole Bible, this would be one of the first ones. And I'll tell you why it's my favorite in just a minute. So here are the young Hebrew men standing tall, standing firm for God. Some other people in the crowd see them, and they're really pretty jealous of those young men. They had bad feelings towards them. In fact, there was a lot of times bad feelings towards the captives, towards the Jewish people in general. So they were quick to run to the King Nebuchadnezzar and say, oh, King, guess what? There are 3 men who are not obeying your decree. Who thinks King Nebuchadnezzar said, oh, that's okay, doesn't matter? No, poor King Nebuchadnezzar, he was so full of pride. He thought probably he was the best king in the history of the earth. He was so used to all these great and noble people, the generals of his army, people in other countries that served him, doing exactly what he said. In fact, some of them would even compare him to a god. He felt really good, and he couldn't believe that there was someone who dared disobey him, especially someone as humble as 3 captive Hebrew young men. He said, bring them to me. Quickly, bring them to me. And they brought Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego before King Nebuchadnezzar. And he was angry, but he probably remembered Daniel, knowing the interpretation of his vision and knowing that these young men had served him well. And so he decided to give them a second chance. He said, okay, I'm going to let you have a do-over. We're going to play the music again. And when it plays again, you get a chance to bow down. So they get 2 tests in this story, not just one. But they knew in their heart, because they had been faithful to God in small things, they are now ready for a big thing. And they basically said, King, we don't need a do-over. It will make no difference. We will not bow down or worship any other God than the God in heaven. Wow, what a story. What an amazing story to have that much courage, that much love, that much trust in God. Can you read, Andreas, for me? Exodus 20. It's one of the 10 commandments. Exodus 20, verse 4. Sabbath school class, listen carefully. See if you remember which commandment this is. We've learned about the commandments. Which one did these Hebrew boys know they did not want to break, or they did not want to show a lack of trust in God?
You must not make for yourself any idols. Don't make something that looks like anything in the sky above or on earth, below or in the water, below the land. You must not worship or serve any idol.
Good, thank you. So they knew 2 gods are what?
Too many.
2 gods are too many. And they knew that. And they knew who they loved and who they trusted. So they said, we won't do it. And the king got super angry. So he went from kind of angry to super angry. Who would want to be before a super angry king who held all the power? So he said, heat up the fires, make them even hotter. In fact, he said, make them 7 times hotter than they originally were. And I bet they were really hot to start with. In fact, he said, take ropes and bind them up. He must have thought they would fight, right? Not to be thrown into the furnace. Do you think they fought against it? No, so they bound them up. And the soldiers, he got big, strong men to come, and they carried them, and they threw them in the furnace. And in fact, we're told the furnace was so hot that what happened to the soldiers and the strong men that threw them in the furnace?
They immediately died.
They died. They were overcome by the heat, and they couldn't escape it, and they died as well. King didn't care about that. He just cared that those 3 Hebrew men who dared to go against his decree were wiped out and killed. But this is why this Bible story is one of my favorite stories in the whole Bible. So who thinks that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego dies in this story? Probably all of you have heard this story before as well, and you probably even know the ending of this story. But let's think about how amazing this story is. So first, when you think about what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego told the king, they basically said, no, we don't need a do-over. We're willing to die. The king said to them, you have no God powerful enough to save you. That's what he thought. He thought he was the most powerful. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said very nicely, even if we die, our God is still with us. But we know our God can save us if he wants to. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego could have died in our story, right? If they had died in our story, does that mean that God loved them less than if they live in the story? When we die on this earth, what's the Bible call it? Sleeping, right? There's times that Jesus lets us sleep on this earth. That does not mean he loves us. In fact, we've been listening to some stories. Do you remember some of the stories that we've been listening to from Voice of the Martyrs? Mm-hmm. And in those stories, what happens to a lot of the missionaries in the stories?
They die.
A lot of times when they've been going to foreign countries to be missionaries to people who have never heard about Jesus, a lot of times they're killed, aren't they? So that has nothing to do with God's love, whether we live or die. Can you be a missionary through your death? Do you think you can be an example and touch people's hearts through your death? In a lot of the stories from the Voice of the Martyrs, a lot of people come to Jesus through the death of the missionary. So whether we live or whether we die, what's important? Serving God with our whole hearts, loving God, trusting God, and letting God lead no matter what the outcome. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are thrown into the hot, fiery furnace. And everyone watches. And what do they see? They see something incredible. Alex, I know I've kept saying this over and over why this is my favorite story, and finally I'm getting to it. Alex, please read Daniel 3:24 and 25. And you listen, class, and see if why you can hear why this is my favorite, one of my favorite stories in the Bible.
Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." "Look," he answered, "I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God."
Amazing! Why do you think that's my favorite story?
Because Jesus actually came to...
Isn't that just wonderful? Don't you love Jesus? Isn't that incredible? So we know the outcome of the story. They're walking in the fire. Their ropes have burned off, but clearly they're not hurt. They're alive. But more than that, not only could God have just saved them, and that would have been an incredible story, not only could God have sent an angel to save them, and that would be a super incredible story, but Jesus himself comes down to be with them. Isn't that wonderful? Wouldn't you love if you were going through something really scary, something really big in front of everybody? Wouldn't you love Jesus himself to come down and be right there with you? Nebuchadnezzar was probably horrified and amazed. He was astounded. What was going on? And what's really interesting about the story is even he identified who else was in the fire. He said, "Look, it looks like the Son of God." How do you think King Nebuchadnezzar knew about the Son of God?
From Daniel.
From our missionaries, right? From Daniel and his 3 friends? Yes, clearly they must have told King Nebuchadnezzar about one day Jesus coming and being the sacrifice for us. So King Nebuchadnezzar calls them out of the fire, and they come walking out. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Their clothes weren't singed. Their hair wasn't singed. In fact, they didn't even smell like smoke, which is really another miracle. If you've ever gone camping, when you come home, what do all your clothes smell like?
Smoke.
Like smoke. And that's even a small fire. And they were astounded. So if you can picture the scene, mighty King Nebuchadnezzar, all his great rulers and leaders, this big gold image behind them. They probably spent weeks and weeks, maybe months and months making that image, and it was completely forgotten. They were all astounded about this God in heaven who was more powerful than any other God. In fact, more powerful than King Nebuchadnezzar. So when you hear this story, does it kind of make you want to be brave? I remember when I was a kid, now when I read the Bible stories, it makes me think, oh, I hope if I ever am in that situation that I can stand up for God, that I can be the kind of witness, the kind of missionary, that I'm willing to give everything, even my life, if that will show other people about God. But what is the way for each of us to start to become brave like that, to become willing like that, to have that kind of love for God in our hearts that we will follow him anywhere, even to the point of being willing to die for him? It starts with small things. Yes, so that's what we're going to be learning about over and over in our class. You start with the small things, right? You start with praying every day. You start with reading your Bible every day. You start with listening and obeying the commandments that God has given us. And sometimes even the simple things, right? Like what we wear, what we eat, all those are building blocks, building our faith in God, our love in God, and our trust in God. So even when something huge happens, like happened today for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we're able to stand up and stand strong. Do you know what else this story tells me? It tells me that God can deliver us even from the strongest powers, even from the mightiest armies, the strongest kings and leaders, the strongest viruses like coronavirus, the strongest sins that hold on to us. God can deliver us from anything because God is so powerful and he is so good. Let's go ahead and say prayer. Dear God in heaven, thank you so much that you are using all the powers of heaven to help us. Thank you for your Holy Spirit, for the angels, and most of all, thank you for Jesus. Beautiful, lovely Jesus who was willing to come right down into the fiery furnace with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I know he's willing to come down and be with each one of us right now, even if we can't physically see him, that he wants to be with us through his Spirit and through all of heaven's resources. Jesus, we love you so much. We pray that you would keep us safe and go with us throughout the week. Amen. All right, class, let's say our memory verse together one more time. For I, the Lord your God, will hold your right hand, saying to you, fear not, I will help you. Isaiah 41:13.
Hey guys, I'm out here in my cat pasture, as you can see. And today, I'm here for your nature nugget. Today, we are going to be learning about baby killdeer. Found a cute little killdeer. This is a killdeer egg, hatched out today or some recent time. Baby killdeer are helpless. If an animal like a gopher or something came, it could just snatch them away, but their parents take good care of them. We're helpless from Satan and sin. Satan can just snatch us away, but God takes really good care of us, like little killdeer.